All right. Well, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by former Congressman Bob Inglis, who is the executive director of the Energy and Enterprise Initiative at George Mason University, which promotes free enterprise action on climate change. Additionally, as a congressman, he served in the United States House of Representatives, representing the state of South Carolina during the 1990s and the 2000s. So, Bob, thanks for coming on today.
Great to be with you, Ben. Thanks.
So, how did you first get interested in politics?
Oh, I was always, well, my mother said that I was either going to be a preacher or a politician because I talk so much. So that's back in like second and third and fourth and fifth grade, I think. So, um, and yeah, went to college with the idea of being involved in politics. Went to law school, thinking that that was going to be the path, and then got to law school and found out two things that were surprising. One was the law was more interesting than I thought it was going to be. I
Yeah.
thought it would be just a backup to a political career, and the second, I was really came under some really spiritual awareness that I was just interested in it for ego purposes. And so swore off of politics for a period of time, and then spent a couple of years after law school in Savannah, Georgia, practicing law there. And during that time, got a deeper agenda than saw a deeper agenda than ego, and so had the opportunity to move to South Carolina or relocate in South Carolina. And so then the opportunity came to run for Congress in 1992.
Yeah. So, I mean, so it sounds like you kind of had mixed feelings then about politics earlier on.
Yeah.
Was it just,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I was just sort of at first motivated by this sort of ego kick, and then later had deeper kind of reasons to be involved in politics.
got it? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's probably kind of a norm. I mean, it's such a big thing to get involved with that you kind of have to ideally you want to try to get into it, for the right reasons and make sure that, your head's in the right space, I guess, because it's such huge commitments, I suppose, as well. Um,
Yeah, it is. It's also true that I think that you know if it's enough to sustain one's ego, there's something wrong with the crankshaft in that ego machine because
yeah.
it really can lead to some imbalanced people. I think you need
Yeah.
to check that, and be aware that hey, this is really about things deeper than just the kick of having people ask me my opinions on something. And
Right.
so that's I wish that for more people in politics, a deeper awareness than just sort of surfing waves of publicity and trying to stay alive in terms of people being aware of them. That's a
Right.
strange way to live, actually.
Yeah. It's a job meant for service, not for being a celebrity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Celebrity. That's a good point. Yeah, celebrity is a bad way to view politics, because we now seem to confuse fame with infamy, and we'll take either one. It's
yeah.
there really is a difference. You don't want to be infamous, but that is one way to be a celebrity. You can
That's
actually be
true.
a celebrity being absolutely a total jerk,
Yeah.
and so. Yeah, and completely self-centered and completely out for just yourself. That's apparently you can succeed at the highest levels in American politics doing just that.
Yeah, and unfortunately it seems that is, yeah, has become kind of a trend. Yeah. um
Yeah.
so when you first ran for office, what were you thinking when you realized that you got elected to Congress?
It's rather miraculous, really. I didn't really expect to. Well, I hoped to win, but
Right.
nobody expected us to win. To uh, give you an idea about how that was unexpected. I was practicing law at the time, doing commercial real estate law, and my mentor came into to my office. He's also the managing partner of the law firm, a wonderful fellow named David Quattlebaum, who's dead now. But he came into my office, closed the door, and sat down. Now, when the managing partner of your law firm comes into your office and closes the door and sits down, it's a big day. You need, and so David said to me, "Hey, Bob, it's one thing to lose an election. It's another to end in debt." And I said, "Oh, David, don't worry. One of the principles we follow in this campaign is there'll be no debt." "Good," he said, and he got up and left. That's all he'd done is just come to do his avuncular duty to warn me about debt. And so,
Yeah.
and he fully expected, okay, we'll just get this out of his system, and he'll come back, and he'll practice law with us, and that'll be fine. But miraculously, we won.
Yeah. So do you remember like that first day walking into, the Capitol building as an elected official?
Yeah, it really is like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Have you seen the movie?
Yeah.
Jimmy Stewart says, "There it is,
Yeah.
the Capitol," and that is that certainly was the way that I approached serving in Congress. Is just amazing, amazed to have the opportunity to go there and to be in the Capitol. I'll tell you, it's why when the January 6th insurrection came, it's why it was such a shock to me at a very visceral level, because
Yeah.
when I saw a photograph of what I'd always assumed was armed guards, but in suits, with one with a pistol drawn, pointing through a broken window, and realizing that I believe in that picture is the House floor, and just being totally just aghast at the invasion of that very sacred space. That no, you can't walk on that House floor when the House is in session, except that you've been elected by the people of your
Yeah.
district. It's the only way you get to walk there. And so to think that there were thugs who broke into the place, just flew all over me. And so it's just, I can't tell you how visceral the reaction was. It's like, what are these people doing? I mean, you can't do that. It'd be like, it's just a sacrilege to that temple of democracy, as the late Henry Hyde used to call the Capitol, temple of democracy.
Yeah. Especially since you had served there, for many years, seeing what had happened, it's like, it's kind of like waking up to a nightmare, I guess, for you, having been a congressman, been on that floor and then seeing these people attack it like that. It's just, I can't imagine what it's like to be a person that had, spent so many days and nights, working there and then seeing that happen.
Yeah, it really was. In fact, I'd been away from my phone all day, and it was only late in the day that I picked up my phones and looked at it, and I started seeing all these images, these pictures, like I was the one I was just describing. And I think I was with my older brother and my sister, and I think I just started yelling. I wonder whether they thought I just lost my mind, because
Yeah.
I was just beside myself. I just couldn't believe it. It's just it's just beyond my imagination that something like that could happen. But
Yeah.
it's because, finally, to answer your question, it's just that I surely revered the space and was so amazed at the opportunity to be able to serve there, and to have people desecrate the space was really really beyond anything I could have imagined.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd expect, a foreign enemy to want to do that, but you should not. We surely would not expect our own countrymen to do that. That's what makes it so terribly offensive.
Yeah. It's a pretty low historical point in American history to have something like that happen.
Yeah.
So, obviously today, and it's been that for, I guess, a while now, political polarization is kind of like all over the place. What was the relationship between Republicans and Democrats when you served, when you first started?
Well, I wish I could tell you that it was all better back then, and oh, there were halcyon days. There really weren't. I was curious. I was interested to be with several years ago a whole collection of former members, and to hear them talking about it, you would have thought that we were pretty much angels.
Yeah.
I don't think we were angels. Um, so I think the reality is that it's always been a place of contention, but it's been a place where, as again to quote again the late Henry Hyde, he used to say, "Well, at least we solve our issues with talk, not with bullets," you know. And so
Yeah.
so there always have been contentious debates and difficulties in working out solutions. But I think that something that does seem to have increased is this idea that not just I'm right and you're wrong, as someone has said, it's more this I'm right and you're evil.
Yeah.
That's a harder debate to hold, you know.
Yeah.
It's very fine to be able to say I'm right and you're wrong. That's a debate. But when you say I'm right and you're evil, then now you've gotten into a place where nobody's going to win that debate. You know, nobody's going to.
Right.
That doesn't lead to success anywhere.
I guess you kind of go from, colleagues that have, major disagreements to enemies, basically,
Yeah,
in that situation.
yeah, and it's a house divided at that point. A house divided cannot stand, and so you have to sort of accept the fact that sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you can persuade people of other opinions to come to your opinion. Not always, though, and you've got to be willing to say, "Well, I'll come back another day and try again," rather than to essentially try to burn down the house. That's what you really should do, is burn down the house.
Yeah. I mean, so we're like Republicans and Democrats. Did you guys socialize with each other much and stuff outside of, working on the floor, or, what was it like, the dynamics there?
Yeah, especially at the house gym. And of course, I think in previous years, you know, long time ago, I have heard tell, read in history books about, you know, members of Congress riding the trains together, say to Washington. So if you were coming out of the South, there were, as I would have been, you know, if I'd served long ago, you might ride the train for hours and hours with somebody from, you know, some other part
Yeah.
and maybe some other party. Um, and so you got to know them. Now, members of Congress find it convenient to fly in and out and
Hmm.
stay in Washington only briefly. But the one place where I found that during my years it was different there was at the house gym. And that's where people really did relate pretty positively. But I will tell you, there was one real marker of a change, and it's this. When I was first in Congress, there was one TV screen in the weight room, and where all the cycle machines were and the elliptical machines is one TV. And so the big question was, what are we going to watch? You know, and CNN was just on the scene, Fox was just recently on the scene, and so this is back in the early 90s. And so um, you know, there's a little negotiation about you know, what shall we watch. So then fast forward to years later, and what it became is three TV screens, I think, now in the weight room, and people with earbuds. And so no longer was there that negotiation. And so you would see Fox on one screen, CNN on the other, and MSNBC maybe on the other. And so I think that's a big and not welcome change, because
That's interesting.
it was better back when there's one TV going, except when Dana Rohrabacher would come in, a member from California, and he had videos and CDs, I guess, of surfing tapes. Have you ever watched a surfing tape?
I don't think so.
Well, let me tell you, it's about the most boring thing in the world to watch. It's like, it's like, yeah, it's always, they got this music, it goes boo, 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 boo. And then there's somebody surfing. And you're like, okay, that would be fun to do, as in to go surfing, but to watch somebody else do it and to have some voice saying, and here he is taking that wave. When Dana would come in, he'd say, "Can I put on a surfing tape?" And we'd all groan, "Oh, Dana, we don't want to watch that. No, no, they all look the same." I mean, and he'd relentlessly go about getting everybody to agree to watch a surfing tape, and that's when it was time to just finish your workout.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, that sort of gym social life that you're describing kind of sounds like being at like a college or something like that.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
which is it's I think a lot of people don't really, think about politicians that way and like, kind of these normal human interactions that occur between them in places like a gym. But that's pretty funny.
yeah, and of course, I'll give you a vignette of how the I'm right and you're I'm right, you're wrong became I'm right and you're evil, and this whole sort of decline into something like burn down the house um, that occurred in the house gym one morning. I was there at the sinks after and a chairman, a Republican chairman, passed behind me and said, "Don't like you hanging with the enemy." And I thought, I wonder what he's talking about. And then I remembered that the night before, I'd been out to dinner with my friend Dan Lipinski. I'm a Republican and Dan is a Democrat. And Dan was one of my best friends in Congress. And so we'd been to the Subway restaurant, out there at Capitol Hill. And it was a summer evening, and we were out on the back corner of the Capitol complex at the Cannon building, just sort of laughing on the street. And I remembered that this chairman had walked by us and he'd given me sort of the side eye as he walked past.
Oh my
So the
gosh.
next morning, he was there at the house gym as I was at the sinks correcting me. And so I finally realized that's what's coming. I said, "Do you mean Dan?" He sort of said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, Dan's not our enemy." I can tell you, Dan's not our enemy. Um, but that was the correction that was administered to me, a wayward Republican who is hanging with my friend, a Democrat. It's sort of a sad situation, really. It needn't be that way.
That is really strange. I mean, geez, like like you guys are from the same country representing, just your constituents. That's such a bizarre mentality to develop where it's like the Cold War or something like that between the two parties.
Yeah, and particularly if you consider this too, just consider that Dan was actually eventually tossed out in a Democratic primary. I was tossed out in a Republican primary, uh, but Dan is a pro-life Catholic Christian who's pretty close to most, or just a good number of Republican positions.
Yeah.
In other words, somebody that you would think, oh, if there's anybody you could possibly work with on the other side of the aisle, it would be Dan Lipinski.
Yeah.
So to describe him as the enemy, don't like you hanging with the enemy.
Wow. Yeah,
Wow, there's
that's
something. I mean, that's over the top.
yeah, it sounds like it got pretty cutthroat there then. I mean, why do you think that happened? Like what caused that change?
Yeah, good question. I think, and I think it's great that you're doing this history for all time kind of thing. You can
Yeah.
um, maybe someday anthropologists will look at us talking here and figure out whether this was the marker was or the cause and effect. The
Yeah.
cause and effect. I think one of the causes is social media.
Yeah.
I think it's just absolutely a scourge. It's like it's it's just the the self-reinforcement, the news island that we all live on, where we're reinforced by our friends, the that whole system of reinforcing beliefs and casting the other side as the enemy is what social media excels at.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, we would have thought that what we were looking at is a democratization of information and this incredible ability to learn and to share information. And that's true about the internet and the PC. I can look up on Wikipedia most anything that I need to know about, and if I ask the question the right way, I can actually get good information. But the problem is there's too much information out there. And so what we do is apparently we as human beings need some kind of mediating force there that can help
Right.
me interpret all this information that's just too much. And it's like a fire hose. And so could you get that down to something like a drinking fountain that I could drink out of? And that, unfortunately, is some influencers on social media and so the result is that there's then this reinforcement that comes within the tribe, and that's where I think that's the biggest cause of that I can think of the problem. So it's and I should add to that just clearly biased media that isn't that is it's not credible.
Hmm.
And what I mean, it's okay to have a bias in media as long as you disclose that to bias. I'm an avid reader of The Economist, for example.
Right.
The Economist magazine has a bias, and they put it in about every article they write.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just clearly, that you're going to get a fairly laissez-faire kind of approach to every issue, right? That's the
Yep.
way they approach it. And so, but they're credible in that they will also give the other side, and they will give arguments and data that's reliable data. The problem with some other media outlets, we're moving now from social media to actual, paid media. Paid media, they really do go after clickbait. They really do sell stories that are not balanced, are not fair, and do not have reliable data. And the result is pretty disastrous.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like in many ways, the media's promotion of different political parties has become like sports teams, and just supporting your sports team no matter what. Never. It's just like defeat the enemy, let's beat them. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, yeah, and it is, we were talking about countrymen earlier. So like, here in South Carolina, I have people tell me, can you believe those Clemson fans? They are just awful people. And then they say, and then the Clemson fans say, can you believe those University of South Carolina fans? They are just the most awful fans in the world. I know lots of both. I know they're the same
Yeah.
kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's actually no difference between a Clemson fan and a University of South Carolina fan. But so it is and if it would just stay in that realm where it's like just sort of funning
Right.
and about teams and a competition on a certain football game on Thanksgiving weekend, that'd be all right. But
Right.
this is getting into when the sport becomes politics, it becomes, oh my, I'm a white male and I'm at risk of being canceled out of
Right.
society. And I must fight now with my white brethren to protect my rights and my privilege. Then you get some really dangerous outcomes. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's that's way beyond a Clemson and Carolina rivalry.
Yeah, yeah, that gets to, certainly, the next step is, getting involved in like domestic terrorism then at
Yeah,
that point.
yeah.
I mean, and so like when it comes to the media, because I suppose social media came about really, I guess, in the later part of your career in Congress. You know, in terms of like the media's influence, do you think that's what caused politicians then to develop this mentality? It's, you know, us versus them, or was there other factors at play there? I mean, what's
Yeah, what it led to is the ability to be a free agent. I'm not the best sports fan in the world, but I think free agency means that you're not bound to a team. You can go out and sort of negotiate your own contract and go wherever you
right?
want to go, right? And so it became free agency in politics and politicians. And so um, what happens is that people see their opportunity to become either famous or infamous. Really, it doesn't matter. Both will work in terms of developing a following. And so, and it's outside of the party structure. And so there becomes this opportunity to be the most outlandish speaker on some topic. And it results in you getting a nationwide following with lots of those people sending you 10 and 20 and $30 contributions, maybe $100 every once in a while, but it turns into an enormous amount of money. And that politician then now, that free agent, revolves in this world of extreme and can succeed there. And meanwhile, the party tries to say, wait a minute, now we want to stuff a sock in his or her mouth. Really, we don't want to hear any more of that. But they can't do it because this person, this free agent now has all this power that comes
Mm,
from the ability to self-publish basically on social media and to develop that following. And that's really hard to counteract. Because in a political system, you generally have parties that organize the process and serve something of a valid role in doing that. And absent that, where you have these free agents, you end up with some pretty wild results. And people being misled by the free agents because the free agent has to feed that monster. They have to say more and more outrageous things
hmm
or to keep that cadre of people with them because
Yeah.
you know, I'll give you an example. I in my last race, the one that I lost, my getting turfed out in my primary, I had met with 3 80-year-old couples and a 50-year-old couple fast going on 80. So these four couples who previous cycles had given me thousands of dollars. This cycle in 2010, they were giving me Zippo. And it wasn't a money problem we had, though. We had a message problem. I was trying to counter the Tea Party and talk about positive things rather than, oh, we're all done for. It's all over.
Yeah.
And so we had this meeting with these four couples. And so about an hour and I don't know, hour and a half into it, one of the 80-year-old couples spoke for the others. He said, Bob, what don't you get? Barack Obama, who's president at the time, Barack Obama is a socialist, communist Marxist who wants to destroy the American economy so he can take over as dictator. Healthcare is part of that, and he wants to open up the Mexican border and turn us into a Muslim nation. Don't tell the Pope. He thinks they're Catholics down there, but apparently they're Muslims, according to this guy. And so, anyhow, later in that week, I saw John Boehner, who was speaker at the time,
Yeah.
on the floor. I said to John, I said, John, what would you have said to these folks? And he said, "Oh, actually, John wasn't speaker at the time. He was in the Republican leadership, right?" But he said, "Well, I wouldn't have. I would told him it's not quite that bad." And I said, "Well, hold on, John. I can tell you that didn't work. That's what I told him. I said, if you're going to lead these people where they're already going, you're going to have to say over your shoulder, you don't know the half of it. If you knew Barack Obama the way I knew him, you'd really be afraid."
Yeah.
sadly, that's the approach that my party ultimately took. Is you don't know the half of it. You don't know just how bad Barack Obama is.
So just playing into it, I guess.
Yeah, you got to, if you got some fearful people that you're supposedly leading, the problem is you've got to wamp up their fears in order to be their leader. You've got
Yeah.
to amplify their fears. You've got to be the loudest, most fearful person in that stampede.
Yeah.
You can't be the sort of milk toast guy saying, "Oh, no, it's quite not quite as bad as that."
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Is
Yeah.
But at some point, you hope that people realize, wait a minute, why are we all running in fear? Why are we so fearful again? Um, Barack Obama is clearly not a secret Muslim, non-American socialist. All those things that were said of him, he's just not. And so, uh, anyway, that's an example of that the extreme place that we can get to.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty crazy example, but not surprising, unfortunately. I feel like, especially for today's politics. So, I mean, did it seem like then at the time those people seeking lots of attention, was it then you mentioned that you had kind of run up against the Tea Party a little bit in your primary. So was it the Tea Party that kind of garnered that sort of celebrity factor by being like the most vocal about ideas when you were serving? Was that the kind of the push in terms of changing the dynamics between colleague and enemy throughout over time in your service? Or
Yeah, I think the Tea Party um, was a situation where people thought that something was being taken from them that they were entitled to. They thought that they were in sort of an existential fight. That only became worse as Donald Trump came on the scene. So
mm-hmm.
he became sort of the Tea Party to the max,
Yeah.
where it's us against them, and rough them up if they're hecklers out there, and basically take mob kind of actions, mobster kind of actions. All of that's fair game in that kind of a system, and so that's what the Tea Party was. The early stages of that,
Yeah.
and is also just a real sort of a different approach, I think, than I think is the typical American approach. I pray that it comes back to this more standard American approach, which is, as Tom Friedman wrote, America is the only country, and I think in the world is flat. He wrote this. America is the only country young enough and brash enough to believe that every problem has a solution. And it's sort of, he writes there about how Americans are typically the people who roll up their sleeves and get to solving problems. And an example of that, consider JFK in the moonshot speech, September 1962, Rice University, 17 minutes of pure American exceptionalism. I dare say better than any Republican, I'm a Republican, any Republican's ever done that speech.
Yeah.
President Kennedy admits in the speech that some of the materials needed for the spacecraft hadn't been invented yet. No matter, we're going to the moon before the decade's out. I think what he was saying was he had a great deal of faith in the American people.
Yeah.
To show you how out of touch I was in that 2010 cycle, I personally wrote one of the bullets for our hand card in that cycle, and it was, when leaders are optimistic, they're saying they believe in the people they represent.
Yeah.
And, what was more appropriate for those times was, oh, we're all done for. This is all, America's going down the tubes. We're just done for. It's awful. And so I didn't want to be any part of that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I wanted to be saying, we can solve these problems. Yeah, we're in the midst of a financial crisis. Yes, there were excesses at the banks. It was ridiculous lending procedures. The banks are failing, but we can overcome this. We've been through tough things before. We'll get through this one. And so get to the American sort of central feature, which is let's solve this problem. Let's be optimistic rather than say, oh, no, we're done for. So anyhow, that's it didn't work, Ben, in
Yeah.
that 2010 cycle. I can tell you, it didn't work at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad because, like, fear-based politics, that's the politics of, authoritarian governments. That's how you keep people in check and can control them. And, just the fact that the United States exists, I think, is just all based on just positive ambition and believing in ourselves. So,
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's a and that what we what I pray happens is that we come back to ourselves. That we've had difficult periods in American history, clearly, where things have been pretty whacked out, but we've typically recovered from those, and that's the question right now. I've done a lot of reading lately about World War II, for example. When the seventh grade history book understanding of World War II is, the American people were united and all together in this war effort. No, that's not at all the way it
right.
was.
More
Uh,
complex. Yeah.
yeah, we were turning back Jews on boats, sending them back to their death. We were having real discussions about whether, we were even cared about what was happening in Europe. I mean, we were late to that engagement, very,
Yep.
very late, and uh, and so, but ultimately, we got our act together, and we were late, but we got our act together, and we saved the world from a totalitarian regime that would have happily taken over the world.
Yeah.
And so, but it's also true that that experience, in terms of casting, like I'm holding forth here, like I'm a historian or something. That's what you got to do. This history thing, Ben, is it is whether that created for us um, an expectation that there really were clearly white hats and black hats. There were clearly the good guys and the bad guys in this Cowboys movie, Western movie. And in World War II, it really was that way.
Yeah.
Then we had Vietnam, of course, and we were a little bit less clear about, what's
Right.
and that really messed us up, I think. And so we went through a period of wondering there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like that's always a struggle for people to figure out. Because there's obviously many problems, global issues, especially with wars, are not black and white like World War II, for example. Um, but it's hard for people to gauge that because I think that there's so many people that just don't have access necessarily to the information to understand that or are not interested enough to understand it. It's so easy to just to assume that the situation and it's black or white because black or white problems are always the easiest problems to understand how to fix. But the world doesn't really work that way in many cases. So
Yeah, and we want to be the good guys, and I think that the thing that I wish for is more awareness that if we're not the good guys just yet, grace is available to change us. We can change
yeah,
our behavior. We can be redeemed from our mistakes,
yeah,
and that gives the hope of redemption is really important to and it means that you don't have to dig in and save face. It means you can say, listen, I was wrong before. So like, I mean, I was just wrong on climate for my first 6 years in Congress. I said it's nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it.
yeah,
So I admit that's pretty ignorant, but that's the way it was my first 6 years in Congress. And then came back for another 6 years with a very different affect on climate. And it was, so I'm a guy who's been extended a lot of grace by people who knew that I was wrong in those first 6 years, but have accepted me into the conversation. And so their redemption is available to us. And if we live life that way, then you can change and you can improve your position rather than, no, I gotta double down on this dumb thing that I've said, and
Yeah.
I can't ask for forgiveness and find redemption and move along. I have to double down on the dumb thing that I've been saying, or doing.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that people would want ideally to have a politician that is of enough sound mind to adapt as the world changes and as they get more information, and be willing to change ideas, and people you would hope would be glad that people are learning as they go, because it's you're dealing with complex legislation from all sorts of topics all the time, and you're making choices on it. It's almost an impossible task for a human being to come into office understanding everything, and so you
Yeah.
kind of have to grow with the office, I assume.
Yeah, and of course that's what some people say is what you just described. They would say, well, that's exactly what a squish is somebody that changes their mind. So um, there's a squish who's memorialized on the mall in Washington, D.C. Uh, he sits in a big chair at the end of the place.
Yep.
This is a squish. He, Mr. Abraham Lincoln, said at one point that white people can't live with black people. We just need to get these black people out of here. Um, that's the only way to solve the problem. That's actually what he said.
Yeah.
And so later, of course, Frederick Douglass got to him and was able to convince him that
Yeah.
no, that's not the way it is. And Abraham Lincoln changed. So does that make him a squish, or does that make him somebody who saw the light and who accepted grace and moved on in redeemed state, of realizing, no, these are Americans that we must now welcome with the 14th Amendment to the Constitution into the system. And that's why he sits in a chair on the mall, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it'd be hard to find a human being that hasn't changed their mind about something in their life. So it's funny that people would use that as an attack, but I guess if you blind yourself enough, you can go along with anything, I suppose. So
Yeah, because we should be able to distinguish between people who change their minds to bad things.
right.
Um, you know, like the guy who attacked Paul Pelosi. It would have been better if he'd stayed in the nudist camp or whatever. He would have been harmless to people rather
Yeah.
than getting radicalized on QAnon and becoming a guy who takes hammers to 82-year-olds.
Yep.
So you can go the wrong way or you can go the right way. If you're going to change, it's open to you to change to a better position. Um, and really to realize that is maybe the strength of Western thought. I had a guy, an entrepreneur in Spartanburg, South Carolina, told me that he was starting up a textile plant, um, in the Far East, and he said it was really difficult because he couldn't get people, as they tried to crank up the machines, to admit that they had the settings wrong.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
said it nearly drove him to distraction because he said he just told him, listen, it's fine. You made a mistake. It's okay. Change the dial. It'll work. Just
Yeah.
change the dial. Tell me what you did, and we'll learn from the mistake. And he said it was just very difficult because they could not, because of the need to save face, they couldn't say, hey, here's the problem. We set the dial wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Well, then let's set it right.
Right.
Um, and we'll now be making the fabric that our customers want from us, and it'll be great fabric, and we'll all be happy. Um, so, um, so accept correction.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so it's been over 10 years now since you were in office. Did you see then what the country would become today when you were about near the end of your service? Could you imagine what it is today in terms of like political polarization and how the parties have changed?
No, I really didn't. I was wrong about that. Speaking of being wrong and being corrected, I was wrong about that. I thought that what the Tea Party was about was economic dislocation, and that once the financial crisis was over and the Great Recession got sorted out and back into prosperity, that we would come back to ourselves. We went further away from ourselves um, with the election of Donald Trump. I did not anticipate that. We went further away from the American ideal. We went to a place of uh, of just violating all kinds of norms that are going to be hard to restore, I think. But that when and it continues. I mean, when you when you tell a big lie about an election result, and then they say that it wasn't fair, it wasn't right, who would have thought that your acolytes would then double down on that, actually amplify it, make it their basis of winning primaries?
Yeah.
That's where fixing this is going to take some real work to restore those norms, uh, and if you want to undermine institutions, the best way to do it is just introduce doubt. That's all you got to do, is just sow some doubt and have leaders sowing that doubt, rather than saying, "Hey, you know what? I lost, and that's all right." If you want to see a great example of that, what you should do is watch Al Gore's concession speech in the year 2000,
Yeah.
and also watch George Bush's, what shall I call it, acceptance speech, or his victory speech. Both were amazingly congenial to the other, and just remarkable speeches. Vice President Gore's, because he quotes his father as saying, "Victory will do as well as defeat to shake the soul and let the glory out." And I had the opportunity to tell him recently that the glory came out in his respect for the rule of law that night. 35 days after the election, he's finally called on to concede because of the Supreme Court ruling. And then also look at the speech with George W. Bush. George W. Bush is introduced in the Texas House by his friend, the Democratic Speaker of the Texas House. If you can believe it, there's a Democratic Speaker back in the year 2000 in Texas. That's remarkable. What the speaker says about his friend George Bush, who's then declared to be the president-elect. I mean, those two speeches together should be the norm. What we've gotten to in 2020, and then we got worse in 2022, is something way away from that desirable condition for the United States.
Yeah, I guess then politics really isn't very recognizable to you then in terms of what it's become today.
Yeah, it's a real concern, particularly among just the people who, as we said at the beginning, who confuse fame with infamy, and apparently are willing to accept either one. And you really don't want to accept infamy as a path to celebrity. But think about in among our celebrities, really many of them really are truly infamous. I mean, just people that you would not want to have as your brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Um, and we've had politicians who apparently really confuse their role and think that they should be celebrities, and they can achieve that either by doing things that would make them famous or things that would make them infamous. And it really doesn't matter to them which one it is.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's pretty disturbing to see kind of how far we've fallen here into this pit of this darkness in terms of this negativity about our own country, where we can't even agree on election results anymore. It's pretty tough. Um, so I guess we'll just hope for the best. Hopefully we can find our way. I mean, we got through the Civil War, so you'd think that we could overcome, just about anything after that. So I guess history is hope in a way for Americans, but
Yeah, because and I think we do have uh, we may have awakened the soul. I hope we've awakened the soul of many in America who realize that really we need to do something about this. Um,
yeah,
and uh, and so it's I would think that it's always been the case that hotheads last for a while until they are found out.
yeah,
It, um, Here's the thing I learned after 12 years in Congress. Smart is hard, dumb is easy. Um, you can say smart things to people and they will make a head hurt. You can say dumb things to them and they will stand on chairs and cheer for you. And so, um, but the question is, if you're the leader, which do you want to be saying? You want to be saying smart things to them, or you want to be saying dumb things to them? But here's the hope. The hope that I've got, Ben, is eventually dumb is found out.
yeah.
In other
You would
words,
hope, yeah,
that you riled us up. You riled up our fears. You told us about these others that were out to get us. They turn out to be our countrymen, and you were turning us against them. Sure, they're wrong a lot of the time, but they're not evil.
right,
And you've given us nothing except hate, and discord, and you're not solving our problems. So eventually, people, I think, are found out to be those false leaders. That's my hope.
yeah.
Oh, the judgment of history for those people. I just feel sorry for them. I feel very sorry for those people. They are going to be judged rather harshly, I do believe.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, if we recover in a normal way, it's gonna be yeah, quite a lot of documentaries about these times we're living in. So
Yeah,
um
yeah,
well, shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious to learn a little bit about your current work and what you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah. So I run this thing called republicen.org, and we are conservatives who care about climate change, and we're out to convince fellow conservatives to raise their hands in class because they're the kid with the answer. Um, that basically what this is a problem of economics that has an environmental consequence. And the problem of economics is that we let people dump for free into the trash dump of the sky, and the trash dump is getting filled up.
Yeah,
And if we just charged a tipping fee for that dumping, we'd have less dumping. And at that point, if you just made um, an adjustment where through something like a carbon tax, and that's a strange thing for a conservative to say, isn't it? A new tax? Are you kidding me? Yeah, it's a carbon tax,
what
but it,
taxes? Yeah,
yeah, it'd
yeah,
be coupled though with a reduction in other taxes in
right.
equal amount, or a dividend of all the money back to the citizenry. So there's no growth of government. So change what you tax. Untax income, for example, tax pollution. Um, and also apply that tax to Chinese imports and to other countries' imports if they don't have the same carbon tax internal to their country. Now you get the whole world in on this thing. And at that point, the whole world starts seeing the true cost of burning of fossil fuels, because that cost is built in to all products.
Hmm.
And at that point, dirty made accountable appears more expensive on the store shelf than clean, which is cheaper.
Yeah,
Right now, the only reason that dirty looks cheaper is because there's no accountability for dumping in the trash dump of the sky.
yeah,
You bring that accountability, and we realize, oh my, Well, that's not so cheap. Because look, all that is, they're now being held accountable for that damage that's being done. And it's reflected in the price of the product. At that point, renewable clean becomes cheaper, not by some subsidy that the government gave to the renewable cheaper, but rather because you've just brought accountability to dirty.
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's rock solid conservatism, and that Dr. Milton Friedman, if he were still alive, would be proud of that answer. You
Yeah.
know, that you just put all the cost in. There's a great clip of him, by the way, on the Phil Donahue show in the 1980s. Phil Donahue, the liberal, asked the very conservative Dr. Friedman, wait, about pollution then, Dr. Friedman, if you don't want to regulate it. Friedman says, you tax it. You tax pollution. And so, now here's our challenge, Ben, is if you're an actual conservative, to sort of bow at the mention of Dr. Friedman's name. If you're a populist nationalist, you might not know or care who Dr. Friedman was. That's the problem. So we got to have more conservatives aware that, no, there's a conservative answer to climate change. It's just accountability.
Yeah, I mean, that's another problem that, right now it's like the history books are waiting to be written about how do we solve this issue. And yeah, it's cool that you're working to, take down, I mean, just another gigantic crisis, not only for Americans, but the rest of the world, that has huge consequences if we don't start, reacting to it. So.
Yeah. And there's every reason for hope, because just like, if you get back to that JFK example in the moonshot speech, it was pretty. And now in retrospect, we're saying, oh, yeah, sure, we just flew to the moon. That's fine. We knew we could do it. No, we did not know we could do it.
Right.
It was anything but certain that thing was going to work. He also admits in the speech, he talks about the heat, the materials that were needed hadn't been invented, but the heat of the spacecraft re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. He goes into some detail there. And one just, I had the opportunity on the science committee to talk to the flight surgeon from that the mission where Neil Armstrong landed and took that first step. And I asked him in the hallway of the science committee, I said, so is it true that we didn't know about the depth of the moon dust? And he sort of grabbed me by the arm, took me aside because he was so excited that somebody knew that. He said, that's exactly right. He said, we had no idea the depth of the moon dust. And he says, you know what? Those were my patients. I was monitoring their heartbeats. There was a real chance, he said, a real chance, he said, that they were going to fly into their graves.
Oh my gosh.
But the whole world watching. So as God would have it, a little bit of dust was blown away and the eagle landed safely. But he said there was a chance that they were going to die. And so now, that's it's just, the hope that we've got to have is that we can solve problems. We can do these great things. At times they look impossible, but we can fix this climate change thing, just like we won the race to the moon, and have seen that it is not, as JFK said in that speech, it's populated by instruments of science and learning and knowledge, not instruments of destruction.
Yeah.
Because that was the risk, is that the Soviets got there first, and so great national purpose, and we achieved a lot of things, and also, by the way, created an awful lot of useful materials here on Earth that we're still benefiting from tremendously. And so yeah, unleash the innovation is what we say, just like we did with the moonshot. Unleash the innovation in the free enterprise system to solve the challenge of climate change, and we'll get there. We'll lead the world to it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, in many ways, I mean, that's just kind of the human way, I suppose, to overcome obstacles and innovate and build new things. I mean, that's what we've been doing for, thousands of years at this point. So,
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, what's the best way then for people to keep track of your work?
Well, if you're a conservative and you care about climate change, join us at republicen.org. It takes all about 45 seconds. So all we need is your email address and your zip code. Zip code, because we want to make you visible to your visit to your member of Congress and to your two senators, because they're starting to get it that you exist, conservatives who care about climate change. But they need to know it. They need to know you're there. And so, yeah, republicen.org, the join button will follow you wherever you go on that website. And click on it. It takes about 45 seconds. And we'll be able to communicate with you and let you know about things going on in your area, and make it so you can be visible and audible to that member of Congress and to your senators.
Perfect. And I guess people can follow you on social media, I suppose, and all the
Yeah, even
different
though I was totally
platforms.
dissing it earlier.
Yep.
But yeah, yes, and republicen.org is also on all the social media outlets, so
Yeah.
platforms. So check us out there. But mostly sign up with us, because we really need you to become visible and audible, or join somebody else, but do become visible and audible if you're a conservative and you care about climate change.
Yeah. Maybe you'll get some Democrats. They'll be interested too in those problems and trying to solve those problems. Who knows?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Really fascinating insights, and definitely, I think your experiences and background gives a lot of hope for what society can be, because you're able to just have such an interesting perspective on so many different issues that I think people on both sides of the political spectrum can get behind, and see like, hey, that's a cool way of looking at it. So
Yeah. Well, it's great to be with you, and hope to see you in person sometime soon.
absolutely. Well,